2 assassination attempts on the same person
Yeah.
during the same campaign. I mean, how often do we even hear about that?
Yeah, it's definitely not something you see every day, especially not in modern American politics. It's unsettling, to say the least.
To say the least. And we're not talking about just anyone. This is Donald Trump running for president again in 2024.
Right.
We're going deep on this today, looking at this article from India Today. The title, well, it really says it all. Assassination attempts and threats reshaped how Donald Trump campaigned an election. We're going to get into all of that.
Yeah.
But a heads up, it's some pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, it really gives you a different perspective, hearing about what candidates sometimes have to go through.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about the human cost of all this.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the political game, but these are real events with real consequences.
Right.
Okay, so let's get into it. First attempt, it's July, sweltering hot day in Butler, Pennsylvania. Trump's holding a rally, huge crowd, tons of energy. And then someone fires a gun.
Oh, wow.
The article says the bullet, it actually grazed his ear.
I didn't realize it was that close.
Can you imagine the chaos? People running, screaming. The article describes Trump with blood on his face, but he raises his fist at the crowd. It's a powerful image.
It's a scary thought. Even with security, someone can get that close.
Exactly. And it makes the second attempt even more unnerving. This time it's September, down at Trump's golf course in West Palm Beach. Someone actually managed to get a rifle barrel through the fence.
A rifle. Through the fence.
Through the fence. Thankfully, they were stopped before they could do anything more. But still, you can't help but think, what if?
Absolutely. It really underscores how vulnerable even the most protected figures are.
Right. So, thinking about all of this, how common are assassination attempts on presidential candidates? Like, is this something that happens more than we realize?
Well, there have been attempts, sadly. But to have 2 attempts during the same campaign, in modern times, that's almost unheard of.
Wow.
I mean, we all remember what happened with Bobby Kennedy in '68 and Reagan in '81.
Right.
Those were huge moments in history, and they really shook the entire country. And not just because of the politics, but the trauma of it all.
Exactly.
And what's so interesting is that even these attempts that fail, they still leave a mark. They change things.
Yeah, it makes you think about the psychological impact on the candidate, on the country. It's like a collective trauma we all experience.
Exactly. It's a loss of innocence, a sense of vulnerability, this feeling that the very systems we rely on are really fragile.
It's kind of like after 9/11, everything changed,
Right.
especially in airports.
Yeah.
All those new security measures.
Right.
Because the threat felt so real.
Yeah.
But in this case, what they're trying to protect, it's not a building, it's not a plane, it's a person.
Yeah.
And according to this article, these assassination attempts, they've completely changed how Trump runs his campaign. Everything is different.
Well, and that's often how it works with security, unfortunately. Something bad has to happen first.
Yeah.
And then suddenly everyone sees the holes, the weaknesses, and then they scramble to fix it.
But it makes you wonder, why wasn't it like this already? And what exactly does this new normal look like for Trump?
Think about it. Way more Secret Service agents, for one.
Yeah.
Armed guards at campaign headquarters. Every single event, no matter how small, you're talking airport-level security checks.
Intense.
Logistically, it's a nightmare. And the cost. Astronomical.
I bet. And the article mentions cancellations, events moved to different locations, even worries about holding rallies outdoors at all because someone might use a drone.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other level.
And then there's Trump, of course. He's accusing the Biden administration of actually holding back security resources on purpose, saying they're trying to give Kamala Harris, Biden's running mate, some kind of advantage by making it harder for him to hold these big rallies.
Whether it's true or not, that kind of accusation, it shows how much distress there is.
Yeah.
This paranoia. And it raises these questions about, like, how much is enough? How much security is even possible to protect someone like that?
Right.
And is this really the future of campaigning? Will it always be this way now? Or is it just because of the specific threats around this particular election?
It's a scary thought. Not just the practical stuff, the metal detectors, the bodyguards, but the mental toll it must take on everyone.
Yeah.
You're living in this constant state of alert, never knowing when or where the next threat might pop up. And it makes you wonder, beyond even the campaign trail, what does this do to our political discussions?
Right.
And as if things weren't already wild enough, there's another layer to this whole thing. It's not just threats here in the U.S. that Trump's worried about. This article talks about death threats coming from Iran. Yeah. And get this, they're connected to the killing of General Qasem Soleimani back in 2020.
Wow. Okay, that definitely adds a whole other level of complexity. We're not just talking about like some disgruntled voters or fringe groups anymore.
Right.
This is international tensions. This is geopolitical conflict, potentially spilling over into a U.S. election.
Yeah.
That's unprecedented.
Totally. And just in case, some people need a refresher, Soleimani was a top Iranian military leader.
Right, right.
And it was the Trump administration that actually authorized that drone strike that took him out.
Yeah, and that was a huge deal. The assassination of Soleimani, that was a major escalation between the U.S. and Iran. It was a huge event, and it's still having ripple effects, obviously.
Clearly. And it gets even more tangled up because then the article brings up this Pakistani man. He was arrested, and apparently he had ties to Iran, and they believe he was planning to assassinate Trump.
Oh, wow. So it's not just talk, there are actual plots in motion.
Right. And then on top of all of that, you've got the whole cyber warfare angle.
Right.
The article says Iranian hackers actually stole info from the Trump campaign and were trying to use it against him.
See, and that's the thing about modern campaigns. They're so vulnerable to that kind of attack.
Totally.
We always think about physical security, the bodyguards, the barricades, but honestly, stealing data,
Yeah.
strategic documents, private conversations, that kind of thing,
Right.
that can be just as damaging. It can completely derail a campaign, it erodes trust, and it could even affect the outcome of the election.
It's crazy. So let's recap. You've got actual attempts on his life, death threats from another country, cyber attacks, all of that on top of just the normal stress of running for president. How does anyone deal with all of that, even someone like Trump?
Well, the article mentions that in public, he tries to make light of it. He even jokes about getting the yips after almost being shot.
Really?
Yeah. But you also see this shift in his speeches and his whole message.
That's so.
He talks more about divine intervention, this idea that, like, he's being targeted because he's a truly important president, a consequential president, he calls it.
There's this one quote from Trump in the article that really stuck with me. He said, "I had a good life before I did this. Nobody was shooting at me."
Wow.
It makes you wonder, right?
Yeah.
About the price of ambition, the sacrifices people make for power.
Yeah. That's actually, that's a pretty insightful thing for him to say. You can tell there's a real sense of, I don't know, maybe even a little regret there.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes you think about how this has really affected him on a personal level. I mean, how do you even process that
Yeah.
constant fear, the knowledge that someone is actively trying to kill you?
Right. It's got to mess with your head.
Big time.
Mm.
And, I mean, it's got to affect how he approaches the campaign, how he talks to voters.
Absolutely.
Does he become more cautious? Does he pull back from the public?
Right. Or does it make him dig in deeper? Does he feel like he's under siege and he has to fight back even harder?
Exactly. And how do voters see all of this? Are they sympathetic? Do they see him as a victim? Or do they worry about how he'd handle pressure if he was actually in office, if he couldn't even handle the campaign?
It's fascinating, isn't it, how this all plays out?
Totally.
And I think that's something really important to think about as this election unfolds, how these events, how these threats, how they're shaping the entire race.
For sure.
How are these candidates adapting? What are they doing to protect themselves, to get their message out? And maybe even more importantly, how does this change how you feel about the candidates and what's really at stake in this election?
It really makes you think. It's been a wild deep dive today, and we've covered a lot. Assassination attempts, international threats, cybersecurity, definitely some heavy stuff to consider as we move closer to this election.